If you're an avid PC gamer, then you may have come across a few terms ending in the word sync, like vertical synchronization, G-Sync, and FreeSync. All of these try to tackle the same fundamental problem. The way to do so is what's different. In the world of high FPS gaming, most people don't have high refresh rate displays to go along with that. People are playing games like The Witcher 3 on 100 FPS, but only have a 60 Hz display that cannot take full advantage of all those extra frames. When you have a screen that has a mismatched frame rate and refresh rate, then you can encounter many problems that will ruin your gaming experience and drive you away from the immersion that you had in the game world. The biggest issues that can occur are screen tearing and screen stuttering. Screen tearing happens when the frame rate of your game does not match with the refresh rate of your monitor. This ends up starving the GPU, or the monitor and frames are then displayed incorrectly. If the frame rate is higher than the monitor can handle, then multiple frames will occur as one frame. And the same will happen if the frame rate is lower. FreeSync is the solution to this problem. So let's take a deep dive into AMD's remedy to this common yet frustrating issue. It was developed as an answer to NVIDIA's G-Sync in 2014. G-Sync in of itself is a type of adaptive sync technology, which is also a derivative of the vertical synchronization technology. All of these technologies want to achieve a similar goal, and that is to try reducing screen tearing and screen stuttering as much as possible, and do so without adding any additional inconveniences into the mix. To really understand this tech, you'd have to understand why it's needed. So let's begin. Your GPU is responsible for showing you what you see on your screen. It does so by rendering frames, and then painting them on your screen from top to bottom, left to right. The CPU does all the logical work beforehand and sends the final data to the graphics processor, so it can render that data into frames. Before sending those frames to the monitor, they are sent and then temporarily stored in the frame buffer, which is located in the video memory of your video card. This frame buffer is a middleman between the GPU and the monitor. It stores the frame before it's ready to be sent to the monitor when the monitor is actually ready to receive it. Screen tearing happens when either the monitor is not yet ready to receive the next frame or has been ready, but the GPU isn't churning out frames fast enough. This rate at which the monitor can actually receive and show the frames is known as refresh rate. If a monitor is rated at 60 Hz, that means that it can refresh 60 times in a second and can receive new frames 60 times in a single second. And the refresh rate of a monitor is a fixed value that cannot change, unlike the frame rate, which can change and does fluctuate all the time. Now, imagine this. You're playing Fortnite and getting 100 FPS, but your monitor is only 60 Hz, so it can only refresh 60 times every second, and thus can only handle 60 frames at a time, and not 100. So when you force it to display 100 FPS, it won't be able to bear that load and start to show incomplete frames that are out of sync. Before the previous frame is shown completely on the screen, the next frame is already in the buffer and is then pushed along to be shown on the screen. So you get a mixture of two frames that do not align vertically and are out of sync with each other. This phenomenon is known as screen tearing. This also occurs when the frame rate is lower than the refresh rate, since this time around the monitor is waiting for the frames, but the GPU is not producing enough of them. So you see literally two unfinished frames stitched together on your screen. The solution to this is VSync or vertical synchronization. But vertical synchronization only solves one part of the problem, and that is when the FPS is exceedingly high. It will cap the FPS to match the refresh rate. But this introduces input lag because you're essentially just forcing the frames to be capped. In turn, if you press a key to do any action and it gets registered instantly, the frame that actually shows that action happening in-game is delayed because the FPS is capped. This is especially noticeable in online and competitive games where response times or key and input delay is unacceptable. Another issue with vertical synchronization is that it does not account for frame drops. If you enter a graphically demanding area in your game that stresses the GPU, making it fall from 100 FPS to just 50, then vertical synchronization will turn it down even more by 50%. So instead of those 50 FPS, you're only getting 25. This happens because vertical synchronization thinks that the video card is unable to keep up with the monitor and is getting stressed too much. In turn, you experience screen stuttering. Screen stuttering is basically just screen tearing, but worse since this time around. You're devoid of frames instead of being drowned in them. Hence, the monitor keeps demanding frames that can match the refresh rate, but since the GPU cannot match that demand just yet, you see repetitions of frames and incomplete, unfinished frames being pushed out without being fully rendered. So to solve these problems, a new technology was developed known as adaptive sync, which acted like a smart toggle for vertical synchronization, turning it on when the frames were high, and as soon as they dropped below the monitor's demands, vertical synchronization would get turned off. This solved many problems that came with vertical synchronization, but we still weren't fully there yet in terms of smoothness, stability, and consistency. Enter variable refresh rate. Adaptive sync enabled variable refresh rate monitors could dynamically adjust and adapt their refresh rate to whatever the frame rate of the game was. This completely changed the game since now refresh rate became an unlocked value that could fluctuate just like the frame rate. Quickly, NVIDIA built upon this tech and introduced their G-Sync technology, and then the next year, AMD followed with FreeSync. AMD FreeSync builds upon Video Electronics Standards Association's adaptive sync standard of variable refresh rate displays. What this means is that it is not really a proprietary technology, but an open-source one. Anyone can make a display capable of variable refresh rate by using Video Electronics Standards Association's adaptive sync standard, and it then has to go through a rigorous certification process conducted by AMD, which then allows the monitor to be FreeSync compatible. Every monitor has a scaler chip and board inside of it. That scaler acts like the brain of the monitor and controls it by taking care of all the processing, decoding the image input, rendering the image, controlling the backlight, and you get the idea. FreeSync is essentially a software-based solution that allows AMD Radeon cards to communicate with the scaler present on board the displays. This way, it can sync the refresh rate of the monitor to the frame rate that the GPU is outputting. FreeSync monitors come with a specified variable refresh rate range, meaning that they aren't entirely adaptive down to the lowest refresh rate possible. Most FreeSync monitors can only go as low as 48 Hz in minimum variable refresh rate range, while some are as good as G-Sync monitors and can go down to 30 Hz, but those are quite rare. For example, a 75 Hz display will come with a 48-75 Hz variable refresh rate range, while a 144 Hz monitor will come with a 48-144 Hz variable refresh rate range. This tech can only operate in these ranges. If your frame rate exceeds that of the monitor, then FreeSync will cap the frame rate, and as soon as it falls, it will dynamically try to match it. So what happens when the monitor's frame rate falls below its variable refresh rate range minimum? That is 48 Hz. It will simply multiply the frame rate by duplicating frames to match the variable refresh rate range. This feature is called low frame rate compensation. Unlike G-Sync, FreeSync is software-based, not hardware-based, and does not require a specific module to be put inside the monitor. Instead, any Video Electronics Standards Association adaptive sync standard scaler can qualify for AMD's FreeSync compatibility, and that's why these monitors are also cheaper than G-Sync monitors. On top of that, like G-Sync is exclusive to only NVIDIA cards, this technology is also exclusive to only AMD cards. We've already discussed how it works and what it really is, so now let's shift gears and focus on its features. FreeSync's biggest selling point is that it eliminates screen tearing and also screen stuttering via variable refresh rate. On top of that, it also reduces screen lag and any artifacts related to out-of-sync gaming. It does all this at a relatively cheap cost, since it's a software-based remedy and doesn't require proprietary hardware. It's miles better than vertical synchronization and does essentially what G-Sync achieves but at a lower price. Plus, there is a lot more variety of FreeSync monitors out there too, more than the G-Sync compatible ones, so you can choose whichever one you prefer from a wide pool of options that best fit your feature set. It is a great technology that can help you cut down on screen tearing, screen stuttering, and screen lighting issues. It's fundamentally better than vertical synchronization because it's dynamic, and via variable refresh rate, it can adapt to the FPS of your game. It also reduces input delay, so playing online competitively is made plausible with FreeSync. In the end, you have to ask yourself, can you live with screen tearing? If yes, then none of the synchronization technologies will ever be of any worth to you. If you're playing professionally, then you'd prefer having the best performance over the best visuals, so it will not be worth it for you. It's definitely worth it for those who are looking to play games at higher frame rates without coming across screen tearing, but don't have the money to spend thousands of dollars on a new display. And since FreeSync monitors come quite cheap, it's a great option. Stick to G-Sync if you have an NVIDIA graphics processor. And lastly, if you already have an AMD video card, then investing in a FreeSync monitor would be the next best option. other than a Ryzen CPU, of course. If you want the simple answer, then yes, FreeSync is worth it, since it allows you to dynamically play at the same refresh rate as your FPS.